A woman burns a letter. She watches it curl to ash and does not shed a single tear because the thing that should have broken her, she has already learned not to fear. That same evening, a carriage stops outside the finest house in town. Slow, heavy. The sound of something that arrives without hurry because the world will wait for it. The doors open, and a crowded room forgets how to make noise. The man who steps inside has hair white as fresh snow, skin so pale it seems the sun has never touched it. His dark eyes move across the room, every guest, every corner, every exit, like a man reading a contract he intends to hold someone to. Then his gaze stops. On her, on the woman the whole town has just finished deciding was beneath their notice. His hand, when it finds hers, is cold as stone drawn from the bottom of a winter well. She notices. She says nothing. The letter came on a Tuesday. Cora Ashby read it once. Then she read it again. Not because she had misunderstood it the first time, but because some small, stubborn part of her hoped the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder if she looked hard enough. They did not. Preston Hale had written it in his careless, looping hand. The hand of a man who had never once worried about running out of ink, or money, or time. He informed her, as if she were a tenant behind on the rent, that his engagement to Vivian Marsh would be announced that very afternoon. At the summer party, the Aldertons' summer party. The one the whole of Harrow Bay had been buzzing about for a month. He signed it with his initials, just his initials. As though a full name would have cost him something, Cora stood by the fireplace. She held the letter over the low flames, and she watched. The corners curled first, then blackened, then the fire took the rest of it, hungry and quick, and in 30 seconds the thing was gray ash and nothing at all. She did not cry. 2 years ago she would have. 2 years ago a wound like this would have folded her in half, would have left her on the floor of her mother's kitchen until her ribs ached and her eyes swelled shut. She knew this, because it had happened. Not over a betrayal this large, over smaller ones. A cut remark at a church supper. A door closed too firmly. Her name left off an invitation list she had once taken for granted. But grief, it turned out, was a thing you could wear down, like a stone in a river. Rub it long enough and it goes smooth. Goes quiet, goes still, so today she felt no storm, only a clean, cool draft of something that surprised her. Relief. She went upstairs. She changed into her best dress, the dark blue cotton. The one she had mended at the sleeve so carefully you had to know exactly where to look. She pinned her hair back. She did not glance in the mirror, and she told her mother she was going to the party. Her mother's face did every terrible thing a mother's face does. It crumpled, it reached. It tried and failed to be brave. "You don't have to go," her mother said. "I do," Cora said. "That's exactly the point. Because a woman who hides is a woman who has agreed that she was wrong." And Cora Ashby had not agreed to anything. The town of Harrow Bay sat on the Rhode Island shore, all salt air and old money and older grudges, and the Alderton parlor sat at the very top of its finest street, warm and crowded and thick, with the perfume of flower arrangements that had cost more than the Ashby family spent on food in a month. High society had gathered to fan themselves, to laugh at jokes that were not funny, to laugh anyway and loudly, because laughter was how you proved you belonged to the inner circle, that you had been let in, that you were safe. Cora took a small glass of lemonade from a passing tray, and she chose her ground, not the corner. The corner is where the frightened go. She stood near the tall window instead, where the afternoon light came through and put her plainly on display. Let them look. Let them whisper. She would not make herself small to spare anyone the discomfort of her presence. She saw Preston across the room. He stood at the center of a laughing crowd, the way he always did. The sun of his own little solar system. His hand rested on the small of Vivian Marsh's back, on green silk. Expensive green silk, the color of new money and newer promises. Preston saw her too. And here is the thing about a man like Preston Hale. He could not simply let her be. Could not let a woman stand quietly at a window and rob him of his moment. So he crossed the room, bourbon in hand, smile wide and easy and cruel. "Cora," he said. "Loud enough for the circle. Still with us. It's long summer, isn't it? Plenty of it left." He tilted his glass toward her. "A mock toast, don't lose hope. There's a husband out there somewhere. Even for a sensible girl." The circle chuckled. Low, obliging. Vivian pressed her lips together to hide a smile that was not hidden at all. Cora did not flinch. "Congratulations on your engagement, Preston," she said. Level, even, warm almost. Warm enough to be a weapon. I do hope she knows exactly what she's getting. Something flickered behind his eyes. Gone fast. He recovered. A sensible girl, he repeated, to the crowd, chuckling. As if she were a good pair of winter boots. Reliable, unremarkable. A thing you kept in the back of the closet and forgot about until the snow came, from her left, a voice. Old, dry, sharpened on decades of other people's misfortune. Mrs. Doran, well, the old woman said, pitched to Carrie. One hardly wonders the girl's still unmarried. The whole town knows the Ashby land is mortgaged to the roots. What man takes on debt for a dowry? The circle went still. Waiting, Cora turned, slowly. She met the old woman's eyes directly. The gossip about my father's finances, Cora said, is greatly exaggerated. A pause. A small, terrible smile. But please, do go on, Mrs. Doran. You seem to enjoy it so, and it would be a shame to deny you the one pleasure you have left. A breath sucked in somewhere. Someone coughed to cover a laugh. Preston laughed too. A quick, nervous thing. Meant to break the tension. But his eyes went cold for one full second, before he turned back to Vivian and pretended the whole exchange had never happened. Cora stayed where she was, by the window, jaw set. She would not be the one who fled the room in shame. And that is when she heard it. Carriage wheels on the cobblestones outside, heavy, slow. The unhurried sound of something arriving that did not need to hurry, because the world would wait for it. Then bootsteps on the front stairs, measured, certain. One after another, patient as a clock, the parlor doors opened, and the room forgot how to make noise. A man stepped inside, tall, taller than any man in Harrow Bay had a right to be. He carried himself with the quiet authority of a king who had never once been told no. His features were striking, carved, utterly distinct from every soft, sunburned, well-fed face in that room. His hair was white, not gray, not silvered by age, white as fresh snow, and thick, falling neatly around a face so pale it seemed lit from somewhere the sun could not reach. His eyes were dark, very dark, and they moved across the room slowly, cataloging it. Every guest, every corner, every exit. The way a man reads a document he intends to hold someone to. He wore a simple dark coat. No ornament, no gold, no display of any kind, and somehow he was the wealthiest thing in the room. The hostess, Mrs. Alderton, nearly overturned a side table in her rush to reach him. She fluttered, she gushed. She said his name like a prayer. Mr. Ashgrove, what an honor, we had no idea. Corvin Ashgrove gave her a brief nod. He said something about brief business nearby. Something polite and empty and clearly rehearsed, but his eyes were already moving past her, past the merchants, past the politicians' wives, past Preston Hale, who had gone very quiet, and they stopped. On Cora, the whole room felt it. 100 faces turning to follow that dark gaze to the plain woman in the mended blue dress by the window. The woman they had just finished writing off, Corvin Ashgrove, began to walk, and the crowd moved around him. Not because he pushed. He did not push. They moved the way a river moves around a stone that has been sitting in it for 1,000 years. Instinct. Deference. The old animal knowledge that some things you simply do not stand in front of. He stopped directly before her. Miss Ashby, he said, quiet, certain. Her name in his mouth like he already knew the whole story it belonged to. He did not so much as glance at Preston, and Preston Cora saw it. Preston watched with the sharp, sick alertness of a man who has just realized he has been outranked in his own kingdom, and does not know by whom. Cora met the stranger's dark eyes. She did not flinch. She would think later, simply out of the material that flinching required. "Are you acquainted with the Aldertons?" she asked. "No," he said. "I came because as I was told you would be here." The silence in the room became a living thing, a mysterious white-haired man, a man of obvious fortune, ignoring the entire wealthy elite of Harrow Bay, to speak. To a woman they had spent the last hour deciding was beneath their notice. Corvin offered his arm. "I would like to speak with you," he said. In private, and Cora Ashby, calculating nothing, and deciding everything, placed her hand on his sleeve. The garden behind the Alderton house was hot and green and mercifully empty. The noise of the parlor fell away behind them like a door closing on another life. He stopped at a respectful distance. He turned to face her, and he looked at her with a directness that had no politeness in it at all. No performance, just assessment. As if she were a ledger and he intended to read every line. "You didn't have to do that," Cora said. "The whole room. You could have sent a note." "The gathering," he said, "provided the perfect opportunity for my purpose." She studied him, the pale face, the impossible stillness of him. He did not fidget. He did not shift his weight. He stood the way old buildings stand. Men like you, she said slowly, don't cross crowded rooms toward ruined women. Not without a reason. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Almost a smile. You're correct, he said. I have a proposal, a specific one. It would serve us both. And then he told her he needed a wife, not a companion, not an ornament, a wife, to manage his household and his properties in Blackwood, the inland city 2 days' travel to the north. He had, he said, watched her handle her father's tenant accounts over the past year. He had seen her think in clear systems. He had seen her stay calm under a pressure that would have broken most. He had seen that she did not require flattery to function. Cora let 5 full seconds pass before she answered. You're proposing a business arrangement, she said. Not a romance, yes, just that. No apology, no softening. And strangely, it was the most respectful thing anyone had said to her in 2 years. An honest arrangement, he went on. You would have full authority over my northern properties, no interference. In return, I clear your family's debts. I secure your father's land. And I settle on you an independent annual sum. Yours, regardless of anything that ever happens between us. Regardless of me. Cora's heart did something complicated. She did not let it show. Why me? She asked. A man in your position could have any family in Rhode Island. Younger, wealthier. No complications, no mortgage, no father coughing into his sleeve. Corvin was quiet a moment. I don't want a typical high society wife, he said. I want someone who has already walked through hardship and come out your side with a clear mind. He paused. Your ability to stand in that room today, unbroken, while they laughed, that is worth more to me than a spotless reputation among people whose good opinion isn't worth having. She said nothing. Because she did not trust her voice. I'd want the terms in writing, she managed finally. Every one of them. Before I sign a thing, the papers are already prepared, he said, for your review. And Cora understood, with a small cold jolt, that he had known. Known, she would ask. Had counted on it. Had built his entire approach around the certainty that this particular woman would demand the contract before the courtship. If I accept, she said, understand this. It will be a rational decision, based on sound terms. Not an act of desperation. I would expect nothing less, he said, and he meant it. She took 4 days, not because she was uncertain. Because a decision this large deserved its weight. Deserved to be walked around slowly, examined from every side, before she gave it her name. She walked the northern boundary of her family's land in the early mornings, while the dew was still cold on the grass. She looked at the fields her father had worked for 30 years. Fields that were slipping through the family's fingers now, steady and silent, like dry sand through a closed fist. She knew the truth of it. They would not survive another winter, not without help, not without a miracle, and miracles did not come to families like the Ashbys. In the evenings, she sat across the table from her father. She watched how thin his arms had become since the autumn before. She watched him try to hide the small hitch in his breathing behind a cough. She pretended not to notice. The pretending was a kindness. It was also a private dread that sat on her chest at night like a stone. She weighed it all. A life built on ink and terms and a stranger's cold civility, against the slow, grinding ruin of staying exactly where she was. Of being, until the day she died, the sensible girl by the window. The one nobody married. The one they whispered about. Corvin Ashgrove had promised her no affection. None at all. But he had offered her something rarer, something she had not received from a single living soul in 2 years. Honesty. And respect. On the 4th morning, she sat at her father's old writing desk. She dipped the pen, and she wrote 4 short sentences to the white-haired man. She told him the terms were acceptable, provided he agreed to 3 additions. 1 concerning her father's medical care. 2 concerning protections for the tenant families who would otherwise be turned out. His reply came that same afternoon. 5 words. Name them. Tomorrow, then. They were married on a quiet Tuesday in late July. A small stone church just past the edge of town. The ceremony was short, attended only by her father, 2 witnesses drawn from the church, and a minister who kept his remarks brief and free of sentiment, as if he sensed that sentiment would be unwelcome here. Cora wore gray, not white. She would not perform a joy she did not yet feel. She would not lie in front of God about that. Of all things. Corvin wore a dark wool coat that made his pale skin and white hair stand out sharp in the dim light of the church. He spoke his vows clearly, without flourish, without a single wasted word. The way a man speaks when he means exactly, precisely, what he is saying, and not 1 syllable more, Afterward, her father took both her hands in his trembling ones. "Are you truly all right with this child?" he asked. His voice cracked on the last word. "It's so sudden. I never wanted." "He's honest with me, Papa," Cora said. "That's more than Preston Hale ever was. Honesty I can build on. The rest I'll manage." Her father looked at her a long moment. He had lived long enough to know that a reliable partnership outlasts a romantic promise 9 times out of 10. He nodded, slowly, and he let her go. But there was one more thing. Before they left, the night before the wedding, at the small inn where the party stayed, Cora had gone down the dim hallway for a glass of water, and she had passed the long mirror on the landing. The old spotted glass in the heavy frame. Corvin had been standing right beside her, close, speaking to her about the morning's arrangements. And in the mirror, there was only Cora, the hallway behind her, the lamp. Her own pale reflection in gray, and where he stood where she could plainly see him standing, close enough to touch nothing. The glass held no trace of him at all. Cora had gone very still. She did not scream. She did not run. She did not do a single one of the things a lesser woman in a story might do. She simply looked, first at the mirror, then at the man, then at the mirror again. And she filed the impossible fact away, quietly, in the same careful place where she kept mortgage figures and tenant grievances and the sound of her father's cough, because she had learned, over 2 hard years, that panic solves nothing. That a fact you do not understand is not the same as a threat. And that some questions are best carried a while before they are asked. His hand, when he had helped her from the carriage earlier that evening, had been cold. Cold as a stone pulled from the bottom of a winter well. She had noticed that too. She said nothing. She married him anyway. The journey to Blackwood took 2 days through the green summer countryside. Corvin spent the first afternoon reading commercial shipping contracts, working with a focus entirely unbothered by the rocking of the carriage. He never once looked queasy. He never once looked tired. He simply worked, page after page. Still as a portrait, mid-afternoon, without small talk, without preamble, he handed her a stack of correspondence. "You may want something to occupy the drive," he said. That was all. Cora took the letters. Business correspondence regarding his real estate holdings, and she began to read the way she always read. Sharp, suspicious, alert to the places where money leaks out of a careless sentence. By the 3rd page she found one. A clause on liability for property damage, vaguely worded, wide open. The kind of hole a dishonest tenant could drive a fortune straight through. She folded the corner of the page. She handed it back. "Here," she said, "this clause. It's too soft. Any tenant with a clever lawyer could burn your barn down and bill you for the ash." Corvin read the section carefully. He was silent a long moment. Then he took out his pen and corrected the error in the margin in a small, precise hand. They did not speak again for the better part of an hour. But, as Cora looked out the window at the fields, sliding past, gold and green in the late summer light, she noticed something. The heavy knot of worry that had lived in her chest for 2 years, the one that had become so familiar, she had stopped feeling it as separate from herself felt, for the first time, just slightly lighter. The Ashgrove estate rose out of the trees on the second evening like something from an older world, a massive 3-story house of dark brick. High iron gates, thick old elms crowded close around it, so close that the grounds stayed dim even in full daylight. The kind of shade that did not lift. It did not feel like a family home. It felt like an institution. A place with rules that had been decided long before anyone now living had been born. 14 servants moved through its halls, quiet, practiced. They did not stare at the new mistress, but Cora felt them noticing her all the same. The way you feel a draft under a door. She stood in the main study on her first morning, and she found her salvation. A household ledger. It sat on the desk. Enormous and disastrous. 3 years of receipts and figures crammed into it with no system a sane person could name. The previous housekeeper had invented her own accounting, a creative thing that failed to balance at the end of every single month and had apparently never once been questioned. Cora felt a familiar spark light in her chest, usefulness. She pulled up a chair. She rolled back the mended sleeve of her dress, and she began to sort the chaos into order, the way she had been born to. Behind her, in the doorway, the head housekeeper watched. A solid, square-shouldered woman named Mrs. Harding, arms crossed, face unreadable, studying the new mistress the way one studies weather that might turn. Cora did not turn around, Mrs. Harding, she said, tapping a line on the page. "This linen purchase. Last spring, we were charged 3 times the fair rate. Do you know why? A pause. The master, Mrs. Harding said carefully, does not concern himself with the price of household goods. He leaves such matters to the merchants. Cora finally turned, and she smiled. Small, certain. He'll concern himself with them now, she said. That first night in the great dark house, Cora lay awake and listened. She heard the wind in the old elms. She heard the settling of ancient timber, and just once, she heard footsteps in the corridor beyond her door. Slow, deliberate, and utterly, impossibly silent. The way a sound is silent when the man making it does not quite belong to the world that carries sound. The footsteps stopped outside a particular door down the hall. The one at the end. The locked one. The one Mrs. Harding had shown her that afternoon with a strange, tight expression and a single instruction, delivered flat, as if reciting a rule older than herself. That room is the master's. It is kept locked. You are not to open it. Cora had said nothing, had only nodded, had filed it away with the mirror and the cold hands and the man who did not eat, in that careful, patient place at the back of her mind where she kept the questions she was not yet ready to ask. She lay in the dark of her new home, wife to a man she had known for less than 2 weeks, mistress of a house full of locked doors and silent servants and a ledger that would take her a month to tame. And she was not afraid. That was the strangest part. The part she turned over in the dark until sleep finally came for her. She had walked into a house of secrets, married to a man who cast no reflection, and somewhere under the wariness, under the caution, under the careful cataloging of every impossible thing, for the first time in 2 years, Cora Ashby felt like she had arrived somewhere she was meant to be. The footsteps moved away down the hall, a door closed, and the great house held its breath around her, keeping its secrets, waiting she would come to understand the way she herself was waiting. For the right moment to tell the truth, 7 days. That was how long it took Cora to break the ledger and make it confess. She sat in the study from the gray light of morning until the candles guttered down to stubs. She traced every figure back to its root. She found the leaks, and there were many. A wine merchant billing for casks that never arrived. A coal supplier charging summer prices in a house that burned coal all year. A kitchen assistant collecting double wages through a convenient error in the books that had been convenient for exactly one person for 3 straight years. Cora renegotiated with the 3 main food suppliers in an afternoon. She dismissed the kitchen assistant before the week was out. She restructured the whole system so it balanced to the penny, and it did balance. For the first time in 3 years, the Ashgrove household closed a month exactly even. Mrs. Harding stood in the doorway when Cora shut the book on that 7th day, arms crossed. The same square, unreadable stance she'd held on the first morning, except her face had changed. 14 years I've run this house, the housekeeper said. No one's ever done that. No one ever looked, Cora said. And that was the whole of it, really. That had always been the whole of it. Corvin Ashgrove watched these changes without a word, not praise, not criticism. Nothing. He spent his daylight hours behind the locked door at the end of the hall. He slept, or did whatever he did, through the sun. And he appeared only after it went down, moving through the dim house without a sound, cold and pale and precise. When they crossed paths in the evenings, he listened to her reports. Truly listened. He never made a household decision without asking her opinion first. He treated her with a steady, unwavering deference that would have flattered her if she hadn't been too busy studying him to be flattered. Because there were things about Corvin Ashgrove that did not add up. He never touched food. Not once. The servants set roasted meat and bread and autumn vegetables before her at the long, dark dining table, and he sat across from her with nothing but a crystal glass of deep red liquid at his side, and he never lifted so much as a fork. His hands were always cold. Every time he passed her a document, every time their fingers brushed by accident, a chill that had nothing to do with the season. He moved without sound across the hardwood floors. He cast no shadow when the lamplight should have thrown one. And once early on, she had watched a housemaid drop a tray in the hall, and she had watched Corvin cross 15 feet of floor to steady the girl before the tray finished falling. 15 feet. Faster than a fall. Cora said nothing. She was very good by now at saying nothing. But she was also a woman who could not leave a wrong figure sitting in a ledger, and a man who cast no shadow was a wrong figure. So every night she added another observation to the private column in her head. and every night the sum grew stranger, and she waited. Because she had learned that a question asked too early gets you a lie, and a question asked at the right moment gets you the truth. She was patient. She had time. 3 weeks into the marriage, Corvin placed a letter on the breakfast table beside her cup. "I have to return to Harrow Bay," he said. "A land dispute near the harbor. 4 days. Perhaps 5. Cora buttered her bread. And I'm to stay here and mind the ledgers. You're free to do whatever you judge best," he said. "Come or stay. The choice is yours." She thought about the gossips of Harrow Bay, about Mrs. Doran and her dry, cruel mouth, about Preston Hale and the smug, bored satisfaction he had shown her across a crowded parlor, calling her a sensible girl like she was a boot. She set down her knife. "I'll come." Corvin nodded and returned to his letters, asking nothing, demanding no explanation. Accepting her choice the way you accept the sunrise. It was the small kindnesses, Cora was learning, that undid a person, not the grand ones, the small ones. The room a man leaves for you to simply be. Harrow Bay in late August was thick with heat. The streets smelled of salt and horses and the tar of the growing shipping trade. And by Thursday morning, Cora had received 3 calling cards. 3, from women who had ignored her existence for 2 years. She set the cards on the side table in the exact order they had arrived. She understood perfectly why they had come. Not for her. Never for her. For the name she wore now. For Ashgrove. For the fortune that name carried and the doors it opened. She received them anyway. She poured tea in the front parlor of the rented townhouse. She listened, and she said very little herself. Which is the great secret that talkative people never learn. That the quiet one in the room walks away knowing everything. By the time the 3rd visitor left, Cora had assembled a complete map. The rivalries, the debts, the financial anxieties gripping the town's elite like a fever nobody would name out loud. That evening, in the darkened library, she laid it all before Corvin. "The Doran family is bleeding money on their shipping investments," she said. Quietly, "They're overextended." And 3 separate women dropped hints about a new federal banking law coming. None of them knew they were telling me anything at all. Corvin set down his pen. He looked at her with a sudden, sharpened attention. "I've been trying to confirm the timeline of that banking law for 2 weeks," he said. "Through lawyers. Through contacts in the capital." A pause. "How did you get 3 society women to hand you their husbands' finances over tea?" Cora almost smiled. "I asked about their husbands' ventures," she said. People don't guard secrets from someone they've decided is too simple to understand them. They think they're making conversation. They're making confessions. Corvin looked at her for a long moment, and across that pale, still face moved an expression she had not seen there before. Something that sat right at the edge of admiration, and did not quite dare to become it. "You should have been running my business meetings for the last 10 years, he said. "You should have asked me sooner," Cora said. On the 3rd evening, they attended a formal dinner at the Whitmore house, merchants, politicians, the whole gleaming machinery of coastal money on display. Cora wore dark green silk, simple, perfectly cut, nothing that shouted. She stayed close to her husband without hanging on him like an ornament. She was discussing the southern cotton trade with a knot of women when she heard it, a laugh, loud, easy, familiar as an old wound. Preston Hale stood by the fireplace with Vivian on his arm, holding court with 2 local politicians. A glass of imported bourbon in his hand, Vivian saw Cora first. Her expression froze, genuine surprise, unguarded for half a second, before she forced it into a stiff, polite mask. She leaned in and whispered something in Preston's ear. Preston turned, and locked eyes with the woman he had thrown away. His face did several things in quick succession. Smug warmth first, the old reflex, then confusion, as his eyes drifted past Cora to the tall, white-haired man beside her. The man currently deep in conversation with the 2 most powerful politicians in the state. His striking presence bending the whole corner of the room toward him. Cora did not smile at Preston. She did not glare. She simply met his gaze with the flat, calm look of a woman who has nothing left to prove to anyone. Least of all him, Preston looked away first. He shifted his weight. He steered Vivian toward the far side of the room, and he did not look at Cora again for the rest of the evening. It was after midnight when the carriage brought them back to the rented townhouse. Lamps burning low. Cora sat in the parlor to unlace her shoes. She had expected triumph. She had waited 2 years for a moment like this. Preston humbled, looking away, small. But triumph did not come. What came instead was a strange, quiet pity. for the girl she had been, for the version of Cora who had wept over a man that shallow, who had thought his opinion was the weather that decided her whole sky. She realized she no longer cared what Preston Hale thought, because the smallness of his world had finally become clear to her. And you cannot fear a thing once you have truly seen how small it is. Corvin appeared in the parlor doorway. He had shed his heavy coat and necktie. He looked, in the low lamplight, unexpectedly tired, almost human. "You're still awake," he said. "I was thinking about Preston," she said. "About how small he looks to me now. Compared to what he used to be." Corvin came in, stood by the window. His white hair caught what little light there was. "He was never worth your fear," he said. "And he isn't worth your thoughts now, I know that." Cora looked at her hands. "But knowing a thing in your head and feeling it in your chest, those aren't the same country. It takes a long time to get from one to the other." Silence. Then she looked up at him, at the stark white hair, the pale skin, the stillness that never quite left him. "How long," she asked, "were you watching me? Before the garden? Before the proposal?" The truth. Corvin turned from the window. 8 months, he said. Cora went very still. "I don't make important decisions quickly," he said. "I watched to see whether this town's cruelty would turn you bitter. Or afraid. Most people break under financial ruin and social exile. They curdle, or they crumble. You did neither. Every single day, you chose to stay clear-headed and practical and kind when kindness cost you something." "I thought about giving up," Cora said quietly. "More times than I'd ever admit." "That," Corvin said, "is exactly the point. The choosing to fight when giving up would have been easier. That is what made you uncommon." Her throat tightened, because no one, not her mother, not her father, not one living soul in 2 years had ever named the silent war she'd been fighting, had ever said out loud that they had seen it, that it had counted for something. He had. A stranger with cold hands had seen the thing everyone else had missed. "Are you content?" Corvin asked, "with our arrangement?" Truly. Cora considered the question the way she considered everything. "Honestly, I feel useful," she said. "I don't have to apologize for being clever anymore. That's more than I ever had." She paused. "But I won't lie to you and call it the life I dreamed about as a girl. It isn't that." "Not yet," Corvin nodded. Slowly. "I prefer your bluntness," he said, "to the flattery I usually get from the people I deal with. Is it enough for you?" she asked. This arrangement, and his dark eyes held hers for a remarkably long time. Long enough that something behind them surfaced. Something old and deep, and not entirely of this century. "Ask me that again when the year has turned," he said, and left her with an answer far more interesting than the one she had expected. They returned to Blackwood the next morning. The carriage ride passed in a comfortable silence that felt nothing like the first one. The first had been 2 strangers sharing a box. This was something else. 2 people who had begun, without announcing it, to trust each other's quiet. Afternoon, Corvin handed her a thick folder. "A land dispute," he said. "The Hollis River. Tangled in the courts for 40 years. Every lawyer I've hired has failed to break it." Cora opened it and read. Old deeds. Older claims. Witness signatures reaching back as far as the Revolution. She read for an hour, following the paper trail with the patient, ruthless attention of a hound on a scent, and then she stopped. She read one line 3 times. "This witness," she said. "The one who signed the original deed here. On this date," she looked up. "He was dead." Corvin looked at her. "He died 2 years before the deed was supposedly signed in front of him," Cora said. "A dead man cannot witness a signature. The whole document is fraudulent at its root." Corvin took the paper. "Read it." His voice, when it came, was flat as still water. "My lawyer has had this file for 3 months," he said. "He missed a dead man's signature. The Hollis River case resolved completely in Corvin's favor within 11 days. The moment the opposing counsel realized their founding deed was a forgery, they folded like wet paper. "My lawyer wants to know who found it," Corvin told her afterward. "I told him my wife did." "You should let him think it was luck," Cora said. "No," Corvin said. "I want them to understand exactly what you are by September." A new routine had grown up between them in the great dark house. They worked together in the study after the servants retired for the night, by the light of a single green lamp, the whole city asleep around them. Just the 2 of them, and the ledgers, and the slow, easy quiet of 2 minds working the same problem from different sides. It was Cora who caught the next thief. She flagged a run of letters from their southern trading agent. The man was quoting 2 different prices for the same cargo. blaming rising shipping costs. Except shipping costs haven't risen, Cora said. I checked the harbor records. Rates have been flat all summer. He's skimming, and he's counting on you being too busy to notice. Corvin's eyes narrowed. How did you get the harbor records? You haven't left the estate. The housekeeper's nephew works the Blackwood docks, Cora said. I asked him. Useful information never lives in the fine offices. It lives with the people who do the actual work. It always has. Corvin picked up his pen, drew a black line through the agent's name, wrote one word in the margin, stop. Then he set the pen down and looked at her. You deserve a formal salary, he said. This is well beyond the household arrangement we signed. I already have a generous allowance. We'll renegotiate the contract to reflect what you actually are. My business partner. In fact, if not in name, they signed the amended document that afternoon. Cora read every line twice, because trust and diligence were not enemies in her mind. They were partners. Later that week, Mrs. Harding set a cup of coffee on Cora's desk, and she said, with a knowing look that had no business on a housekeeper's face, the master watches you, you know. Whenever you're at the ledgers, he thinks no one sees. But I see. Cora turned a page. Kept her hand perfectly steady. Our relationship is strictly professional, Mrs. Harding. Of course it is, ma'am, Mrs. Harding said, and smiled, and left. But Cora's heart had given a strange, unexpected flutter, and she sat very still until it passed, and then she pretended it hadn't happened. Which is a thing people do right up until the moment they can't anymore. That moment came on a cold Thursday evening in October. Corvin had been away 4 days. Boston. Some matter he hadn't fully explained. Cora sat at the library desk with a shipping report in front of her, and she heard his silent step in the hall, and his low voice speaking to the footman, and she found she had read the same line 4 times without taking in a single word. Which was not like her, which was not like her at all. He appeared in the doorway, pale, weary from the road. He'd shed his formal coat, and without it he looked less like a king and more like a tired man who had traveled a long way to get home. Are you well? He asked. Cora looked up, and she made a decision she had been circling for weeks. Something's shifted, she said, in how I see this, us. The arrangement. Corvin went completely still, stiller than usual, which was very still indeed. What kind of shift? I didn't account for it, Cora said, in the contract. There was no clause for growing to feel something. For a person. I don't have the terms for it, she pressed on. Because stopping would have been worse, and I don't trust it. That's the truth. I was so wrong about Preston Hale, so completely wrong. I don't trust my own judgment about the heart. So I'm telling you, and I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just telling you, because you've earned my honesty. Corvin leaned forward. The firelight caught his white hair. I spent 4 days in Boston, he said, thinking of nothing but coming back here. To you, Cora's breath caught, after centuries of building wealth, he said. Of building influence. Of building things because building was the only thing left that felt like living. You are the first person who has made me want to build a future. Instead of a structure, centuries, Cora said quietly. He held her gaze. You noticed the mirror, he said. It was not a question. On the landing, she said. At the inn. The night before we married. You cast no reflection. Your hands are cold. You don't eat. You don't sleep at night. You crossed 15 feet of floor in the time it took a tray to fall. She folded her hands on the desk. I've been keeping a ledger, Corvin. In my head. And the figures have been telling me the same impossible thing for months. Silence. Say it, he said. You've clearly already done the arithmetic. Say the answer. Cora did not flinch. You're not what you appear to be, she said. You're something older. Something the sun doesn't agree with. Something that drinks red from a crystal glass and never touches the meat. A pause. The stories the old women tell to frighten children. The ones about the dead who don't lie down. Vampire, Corvin said, plainly. Because he had learned from her the value of a word said plainly. The word is vampire, Cora. I have carried it 300 years. Longer, she had known. Of course she had known for weeks. But hearing it said aloud, in that flat, certain voice, in that green-lamped room, was a different country from knowing it in her head. She waited for the fear. It did not come. 300 years, she said instead. You've watched everyone you knew grow old and die. Yes. And you married a woman who will do the same? Something crossed his face. Pain, maybe. Older than pain. I married a woman who is alive, he said, which is worth more than a woman who is merely enduring. I have had a great deal of enduring, Cora. I wanted, Before the end of everything, one honest thing, she should have run. A sensible girl would have run. Except she wasn't a sensible girl. She was a clear-eyed woman who had already decided that a truth, once seen plainly, is easier to live beside than a lie you have to keep polishing. I need time, she said, and I need honesty. All of it, going forward. No more locked doors between us. If I'm going to feel what I think I'm feeling, I won't feel it in the dark. Blind to what you are, agreed, Corvin said, instantly. No more locked doors, and then his expression changed, because he had not told her everything, and the part he had not told her had just walked, in his memory, straight to the front of the conversation. He reached into his coat, he drew out a letter, and he laid it on the desk between them like a man laying down a card he'd hoped never to play. This came while I was in Boston, he said. From a young politician back in Harrow Bay, Nathaniel Doran. Cora went cold, and this cold was not the cold of his hands. It was the cold of a threat with her family's name on it. Doran, she said, the old woman's grandson. Read it, she read it, and her fury rose so fast and so clean it frightened her. The letter claimed the Doran family had uncovered severe legal irregularities in the old Ashby land deeds, that her father might not, in fact, legally own the farm he'd worked for 30 years, that there would be a formal inquiry. This is revenge, Cora said. Her voice shook, not with fear but with rage, because I embarrassed the old woman at the summer party. Because I didn't sit there and take it. This is that. Dressed up in legal paper? The land has been in your family 40 years, Corvin said. 40 years. Cora's mind was already moving, already sourcing, already hunting. But there might be an old survey note. In my father's desk. Something from 30 years back. I remember Papa mentioning it once. A boundary thing with a neighbor. He never took it seriously. Then we go to Harrow Bay, Corvin said. Before Doran can make this public. Before it can reach your father's ears and do to his health what a court never could. They left 2 days later. Corvin sat across from her in the carriage. He offered her no empty comfort. He did not tell her everything would be fine. He was not a man who lied. Even to be kind. We'll dismantle this, he said instead. Together, using the strict letter of the law. Your mind will find the flaw in their attack before anyone in Rhode Island even thinks to look for one.
It's what you do.
Cora smiled despite herself, and Corvin, for the first time since she'd met him, let a genuine, warm smile break across his pale face. It made him look, for one startling moment, entirely human. She turned to look out the window, to hide the color that had risen in her cheeks. They arrived to find her father frail, thinner than the month before. His coat hung loose off his narrow shoulders as he welcomed them in. Corvin shook the old man's hand with a deep, deliberate respect that visibly steadied him. And then they set to work in the small study. Cora found the survey note 20 minutes in. A single folded page, 30 years old. And her stomach dropped as she read it, because it was worse than a boundary dispute. It was a private agreement between her grandfather and the grandfather of all people, Vivian Marsh. A handshake deal. A small strip of shared land the two neighbors had agreed to leave off the official record, sealed with nothing but a shake and a bottle of whiskey, between two men now long dead. Doran found out about this somehow, Cora said slowly. And he's going to use it. Not to win in court. He can't win in court. An unrecorded handshake has no standing. None, Corvin agreed. I could tell you that much myself. He doesn't need to win, Cora said. He just needs a scandal. He needs enough public doubt to force a settlement, to make the Ashby name a question mark. To make my father's last years a courtroom, and then a colder thought arrived. Corvin. He filed this inquiry fast. Too fast. He knew we were coming to Harrow Bay almost before we did. She looked up. Someone told him. Someone close to us leaked our plans. Corvin's jaw tightened, and what he said next dropped the temperature of the whole room. My lawyer, he said. Silas Wren. He was seen last week, meeting with the Doran family's attorney. Your lawyer, Cora breathed. The man who's had your business schedule for years, your contracts, your travel. Everything. Everything, Corvin said grimly. Cora stood. She began to pace. Her mind was a machine now, humming, sorting, discarding. We don't tip Wren off, she said. Not yet. If he knows we know, he burns whatever evidence there is. We move first. We secure the land records at the Blackwood Registry before Doran can log his inquiry formally. Whoever files first on solid ground controls the story. Corvin watched her pace. And the look on his face was not worry. It was pride. 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, he said. I'll meet you downstairs. But it was that night, alone in her childhood room in her father's failing house, that Corvin told her the last of it. He came to the door. He did not come in. He stood in the frame the way he always stood in frames. Respectful of the line, "There's more," he said, "about Doran. And I promised you no more locked doors." Cora sat up. "Tell me, when I said someone leaked my schedule, I understated it." Corvin said, "Ren hasn't just been selling my travel plans. Doran has been collecting something else. For months, records, old records, church registries, land deeds, portraits." He paused. "He's been building a file on men who have lived too long. Men who appear in a town's records for 40 years and never seem to age. Men like me." Across 3 states, Cora's blood went to ice. "He suspects what you are," she said. "He suspects there is something to suspect," Corvin said. "He's not a fool. He's a desperate man drowning in debt from a failed shipping venture, and he's found what he thinks is the largest lever in Rhode Island. Blackmail. Not just against your father's land, against my very existence." His dark eyes held hers. "If Nathaniel Doran ever proves what I am, Cora, he doesn't need a court. He doesn't need a scandal. He owns me, and everyone I've bound my name to, which now includes you. And your father." The room was very quiet. Cora should have been terrified. A sensible girl would have packed a bag. Instead, she felt something settle in her chest. Hard and cold and certain as a struck anvil, because this was no longer only about her father's land. This was about the man who had seen her when no one else had bothered to look. And Cora Ashby did not run from the people who saw her. "Then we don't just stop his inquiry," she said. "We take away every card he thinks he's holding. The land, the blackmail, the lawyer, all of it. And we do it so cleanly he never knows how thoroughly he lost until it's already over." Corvin looked at her from the doorway. 300 years old, and looking at her like she was the first new thing he'd seen in a century. "You're not afraid of me," he said, quietly, almost wondering. "No," Cora said. "Why?" She thought about it, honestly, the way she thought about everything. "Because you've never once lied to me," she said. "In 2 years, the people who smiled at me lied with every word, and the one man who casts no reflection has told me nothing but the truth. I've decided I'd rather stand beside an honest monster than a lying man." Something broke open behind Corvin's eyes. Something that had been sealed a very, very long time. 6 o'clock, he said again. Rough now, not quite steady. "Tomorrow, 6 o'clock, Cora said, and in the dark of her father's failing house, with a vampire in the doorway, and a blackmailer sharpening his knives across town, Cora Ashby lay down and slept better than she had in 2 years. Because she was no longer facing the world alone. Because for the first time, someone was facing it beside her. They stood outside the Blackwood Registry building at 6:45. The autumn air bit at Cora's cheeks. She had not slept much. She had spent the night with the law books instead, tracing statutes by candlelight while the rest of the house lay dark. And now she waited on the cold stone steps beside her husband, documents pressed to her chest. Breath fogging in the gray dawn, Corvin stood beside her, silent, patient. A man who had waited 300 years knew how to wait for a clerk. The clerk finally came, a grumpy old man with a ring of keys, muttering about the hour. He unlocked the front doors and let them into the cold, echoing hall of records. Cora laid her documents on the wooden counter, the original 40-year-old deed, the full survey, and 3 pages of her own written legal analysis. Drafted in her small, precise hand between midnight and 4, the senior registrar, an elderly man named Mr. Hobart, came to the counter and looked over his spectacles in open surprise. A woman, at dawn, presenting a property argument more thorough than most lawyers managed in a week. Corvin sat down in the corner, deliberately. He folded his hands and said nothing and let Cora lead. Let every official in that room see plainly who held the authority in this marriage. It was, Cora would think later, one of the most romantic things a man had ever done for her. He gave her the room, he gave her the floor. He made himself furniture so that she could be the fire. Cora cited Section 14 of the Registry Code. "Mr. Doran has no direct legal interest in this property," she said. "He is not an heir, he is not a neighbor, he is not a lien holder. Under Section 14, he lacks standing to file an inquiry at all. The strip of land his claim depends on was subject to an unrecorded handshake between 2 men who are both dead. An unrecorded agreement has no standing in a modern court, which means his entire inquiry rests on nothing. On air, Mr. Hobart checked his thick law books, slowly, turning the heavy pages with a licked thumb. He read, he frowned, he read again, and then he shook his head, half in surprise. half in something like respect. "You're right, Mrs. Ashgrove," he said. "He's got no standing." "None at all," he closed the book. "I'll hold this Doran inquiry in review. Not enter it into the public record, not until the standing question is settled." He peered at her over the spectacles, "which it never will be." "Because it can't be." Cora let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. It was not a total victory. But it was time. It was the thing they had needed most. Time to handle the rot inside their own house before Doran could drag any of it into the light of a Harrow Bay courtroom. They walked out into the morning sun. "You read the registry code," Corvin said. "Last night." "While I rested, someone had to," Cora said. "I take my work seriously." He stopped on the cobblestone street, and he looked at her with an intensity that made the rattle of passing carts fade to nothing. "I received confirmation this morning," he said quietly. "About Wren. He's been leaking my business schedule for over a year. Not weeks, not months. A year." Cora's jaw set. "Then we dismiss him, today, and we review every contract that man has touched since the day you hired him." "Everyone," Corvin nodded. And then he said the thing that dissolved the last of her doubts about the strange country their marriage had wandered into. "I've already found superior counsel," he said. "The finest legal mind I've encountered in a century." "Who?" He looked directly at her. "You," he said. "You're the only person I trust completely." With any of it, the plainness of the words settled deep in her chest. Not a poem, not a promise. A fact, stated the way he stated facts. And it was worth more than every love letter Preston Hale had never bothered to write. She fell into step beside him, ready for whatever the wealthy families of Harrow Bay meant to throw next. The review of Wren's files took 3 full days. Cora sat at the Blackwood Library desk with a trusted clerk named Mr. Cross. The two of them working until the candles burned down to the wood. They pulled every contract, every letter, every travel record. And the picture that emerged was ugly. Silas Wren had been passing intelligence to the Doran family for 8 months. Timing it. Feeding them Corvin's travel dates so their financial pressures always landed while he was away and distracted. It was not clumsy greed. It was patient, deliberate betrayal. But there was one thing Cora could not make fit. "He's paid well," she said, tapping a ledger. "Wren. Corvin pays him handsomely." Why would a well-paid man risk everything for the Dorans, who are broke? The arithmetic doesn't balance. And when the arithmetic doesn't balance, someone's hiding a figure. She found the hidden figure on the 3rd night, a letter. Buried in Wren's own files, the way guilty men always keep the evidence they should burn. From Nathaniel Doran to Silas Wren. And it was not an offer of money, it was a threat. Doran had discovered something in Wren's past. An old fraud. A forged client signature from 20 years back. Back when Wren was young and desperate, and had made the one mistake that follows a man forever. Doran had the proof. And Doran had made it very simple. Cooperate. Or be exposed. Ruined. Struck from the bar. Left with nothing. Cora set the letter down. And she felt something she had not expected to feel for the man who had betrayed her husband. Pity. Not forgiveness. Never that. But understanding. Because Nathaniel Doran did not simply buy people. He hunted their weakest moment, and then he owned them. And a man who owns other men's shame is a far more dangerous animal than a man who merely wants their money. He didn't recruit Wren, Cora told Corvin that night. He captured him. The same way he means to capture you. Doran doesn't deal in bribes. He deals in leverage, in secrets. It's his whole method, she looked up, which means the way to beat him isn't to outbid him. It's to take away every secret he holds, and to make sure he understands we hold worse ones about him. On the 4th morning, Mr. Hobart's official letter arrived. The Doran inquiry had been formally rejected. Total lack of legal standing. The land threat was dead. But Nathaniel Doran was not a man who lost gracefully. He could not win in the registry, so he took to the tea rooms. He spread rumors through the drawing rooms of Harrow Bay, whispering that the Ashby land was ruined, that Cora had married for money, that the mysterious Mr. Ashgrove was not what he claimed to be. That last one landed too close to true for Cora's comfort. She listened to the reports from Mrs. Harding, and she made her decision. "We won't let the whispers stand," she told Corvin. "We attend the winter assembly, the Whitmore ball, together. And we show the whole of Harrow Bay society a picture of such complete unity and strength that Doran's rumors curdle in his own mouth. We don't hide from the gossip. We drown it in a display of everything he says we don't have." Corvin stood close to her in the quiet study. "My whole nature is cold," he said. 3 centuries of it, And in all that time, I found nothing I truly wished to keep. Nothing worth the trouble of holding on to. A pause. Until you, Cora reached up, and she touched his pale jaw. Cold under her fingers, as always, but she had stopped minding the cold. The cold was simply his, like his patience, like his honesty. Then we walk into that ballroom as partners, she said, in every sense of the word. Not the sensible girl and her mysterious husband. Us, but there was a thing Nathaniel Doran had done that neither of them yet knew. He had grown impatient. Losing the land inquiry had cost him money he didn't have. His creditors were circling his failed shipping ships like gulls over a dying fish. And a desperate man with a dangerous suspicion does one dangerous thing. He wrote a letter to a man in Boston, a man from a very old family, a family that had, for 200 years, made a quiet and profitable trade of one single thing, hunting the dead who would not lie down. His name was Aldrich Vale, and he was already on the road to Harrow Bay. The Whitmore ballroom blazed with the light of 300 candles and 300 guests, silken jewels, and the bright, hard laughter of people who had never once gone hungry. Cora and Corvin arrived precisely on time. She wore a magnificent deep green silk gown that fell in clean, elegant lines, her mother's old pearl earrings catching the light as she moved. Not new pearls, her mother's. She had chosen them on purpose. A quiet flag planted for everyone the town had ever looked down on. The whole room went still as they entered. The guests took in the absolute confidence in Cora's posture, and the steady, protective way Corvin stayed at her side. Not hovering, not clutching, simply there. The way a mountain is there. Within the hour, Cora had drawn 3 prominent merchants into conversation about the northern shipping trade. She shared insights so sharp they left the men blinking, recalculating, reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the woman they'd written off 2 summers ago. And across the room, by the long refreshment tables, Nathaniel Doran watched. His face darkened as he saw how easily the town's elite were taking to the woman he'd tried to ruin. Everything he'd whispered in the tea rooms was dissolving in real time, drowned out by the plain evidence of Cora Ashgrove standing in the center of the room, thriving, respected, unbroken. But Cora saw more than Doran's anger, because she had been watching the room the way Corvin had taught her to watch a document. Every face, every corner, every exit. And there was a man by the far wall she did not know, tall, lean, dressed in expensive dark clothes that fit too well for a guest nobody could name. He held a glass he never drank from. He smiled at the right moments, but the smile never reached his eyes. And he was not watching the dancers. He was not watching the merchants. He was not watching the food. He was watching Corvin. The way a hunter watches a stag it has already decided to take, Cora's blood ran cold, and that is when a hand touched her elbow. Light, quick. She turned Vivian Charmer of all the people in the world. Vivian in a gown that had cost a fortune, her face pale and tight, and this was the strange part, frightened. "I need 1 minute," Vivian said. "Low, fast, please." Cora's first instinct was ice. This was the woman on Preston's arm. The woman who had pressed her lips to hide a smile while Cora was humiliated in the Alderton parlor. "I can't imagine what you and I have to say to each other," Cora said. "That man by the wall," Vivian said, ignoring it, her voice barely above a breath. "The one in Boston black, watching your husband. Nathaniel Doran brought him. I heard them. 2 nights ago. At the Dorans, Cora went very still. Heard what? "I'm not proud of anything I've done," Cora, Vivian said, and the words tumbled out fast now. A dam finally breaking. "I married Preston for the security. My father lost everything. I did what I thought I had to. But Preston is Doran's creature, has been for a year. Doran holds his gambling debts. And I have sat in that family's parlor for months listening to them plot against you, and I told myself it wasn't my business, and I can't anymore," she swallowed. "That man is called Vale. Doran told Preston he's a specialist in unusual men. He said your husband has a secret, and that Vale is here to expose it. Tonight, in front of everyone. Doran means to destroy you both in this room." The whole ballroom seemed to tilt, because this was it, the thing Corvin had feared in her father's doorway. The blackmailer had stopped trying to prove what Corvin was in secret. He had brought a hunter to prove it in public. Cora looked at Vivian. Really looked. At the fear in her eyes that could not be faked. At the woman who had every reason to stay silent and had chosen, at the last possible moment, not to. "Why are you telling me this?" Cora asked. "You gain nothing. Because you stood in that parlor and didn't break," Vivian said quietly. "And I've thought about it every day since." About how I laughed. About the kind of woman who laughs at that. I don't want to be her anymore. A breath. And because I finally understand who ruined my life. It wasn't you, Cora. It was never you. It was them. There was one more thing, Cora realized. A thing Vivian could not have missed, that land Doran's using against my father, Cora said slowly. The strip in the old survey, it was your grandfather's handshake. With mine, Vivian's face went white. I know, she whispered. I found the copy in my father's papers a month ago. That's how I knew what Doran was really doing. He's using my family's mistake to bury yours. And I let him. Right up until tonight, and there it was. The last thread pulled tight. The woman Cora had every reason to hate. Bound to her, it turned out, by 2 dead grandfathers and 1 shared enemy. Cora made a decision in half a second. Then don't leave, she said. Stay near Preston. Watch, and if I need you to say what you just told me out loud, to the right person, will you? Vivian's chin lifted. Something firmed in her face. Yes, she said. The enemy of my enemy, Cora thought, is sometimes just a frightened woman who finally grew a spine. She found Corvin near the politicians. She did not rush. She did not let her face show a thing. She glided to his side and put her hand on his arm and leaned in as if murmuring some sweet nothing. And what she said was, Doran brought a hunter. Vale, from Boston. He means to expose you tonight, in front of all 300 people. Vivian just warned me. Corvin did not flinch. 300 years teaches a man not to flinch. But she felt the arm under her hand go rigid as iron. A Vale, he said. Very low. I know that name. That family has hunted my kind since before this country existed. If he's here, Cora, he has silver. He has proof. He has a plan. I cannot fight him in a room full of witnesses without proving everything he wants to prove. Then we don't fight him, Cora said. Cora, listen to me. Her voice was calm, cold. The voice she used on a ledger that was hiding something. You said the Vales have hunted for 200 years. 200 years of hunting means 200 years of records. Money changing hands, men disappearing, debts, deaths, bodies. You don't hunt for 2 centuries and keep your hands clean. Nobody does. Everybody has a ledger, Corvin. Even the hunters. Corvin looked at her. You've been busy, he said slowly. Since I told you what I was, when you told me there were men who hunt your kind, I did what I do, Cora said. I wrote to Mr. Cross. I had him pull every public record he could find on families known for unusual disappearances. The Vale name came up. Boston and Corvin. She almost smiled. The Vales are not careful men. They think no one dares look at them, which means no one ever has, which means the records are just sitting there. Waiting, something moved across his face. Not admiration this time. Something larger. Something that had waited 300 years to arrive. What did you find? He asked. Enough, Cora said. Aldrich Vale is wanted quietly in 2 states. A land seizure in Providence that put a family in the ground and their deed in his pocket. A man who vanished after lending him money. It's all there in the record for anyone who bothered to add it up. He hunts monsters because it's the one line of work where nobody asks what happened to the body. She squeezed his arm. He came here to expose a secret. He doesn't know he walked into a room with a woman who's already exposed his. Corvin was quiet a moment. You would do that, he said. Face a man who kills my kind for a living. Bluff him down. In front of 300 people. For me. Not a bluff, Cora said. And not for you, she met his eyes. For us. There's a difference now. I looked it up. And Corvin Ashgrove, 300 years old, who had watched empires rise and fall and had long ago stopped expecting anything new, under the sun looked at his wife like the sun had just come up for the very first time. Cora crossed the ballroom alone. Head high, green silk whispering. She walked directly toward the man in Boston black by the far wall, and she watched his flat, cold eyes track her the whole way. Mild curiosity in them. The curiosity of a hunter who has not yet realized that, tonight, he is not the only one holding a weapon. She stopped in front of Aldrich Vale. Mr. Vale, she said pleasantly. You're a long way from Boston. The smile stayed on his mouth. It left his eyes entirely. You have me at a disadvantage, madam. Cora Ashgrove, she said. You've been staring at my husband for the better part of an hour. I thought I'd introduce myself. Before you did whatever it is Nathaniel Doran paid you to do. The smile flickered. You're direct, Vale said. I don't have the time for anything else, Cora said. So let me be direct about this too. I know why you're here. I know what you think you know about my husband. And I know a great deal more about you. She let that sit. 1 heartbeat. 2. Providence. 9 years ago. The Harlan family. Their land, their unfortunate accident. and the very fortunate way the deed found its way to you afterward. Aldrich Vale went absolutely still. The same stillness she had learned from Corvin. The stillness of a predator that has just heard a twig snap behind it. I don't know what you think. And the man in Fall River, Cora went on, gently, relentlessly, the way water wears down stone. Who lent you money? Who was never seen again? There's a record, Mr. Vale. There's always a record. You people who hunt in the dark forget that the daylight keeps its books. She tilted her head. You came here tonight to stand up in front of 300 of the most powerful people in Rhode Island and announce that my husband is something unnatural. Something they should fear. Go ahead. Do it, she smiled. And the moment you finish, I will stand up and announce to those very same 300 people exactly what you are. A murderer, a land thief, a fraud wanted in 2 states, with the documents to prove every word delivered to every man in this room by morning. So, one of us walks out of this ballroom ruined tonight, Mr. Vale. I've done the arithmetic. It isn't going to be me. Silence. The music played on somewhere behind them. The dancers turned, and in the small cold space between Cora Ashgrove and Aldrich Vale, a war was fought and finished in the length of a single held breath. Vale looked at her, long, hard. Searching for the bluff, he did not find one, because there wasn't one. You're not what I expected, he finally said. No one ever expects me, Cora said. It's my one great advantage. Now, you're going to set down that glass you're not drinking from. And you're going to walk out that door. And you're going to write to Nathaniel Doran that his information was mistaken, his money is spent, and Boston will not be troubling the Ashgroves again. Ever, a pause, and in exchange, the daylight keeps your books to itself. Do we understand each other? Aldrich Vale set down his glass. He inclined his head. A small, stiff, furious bow. The bow of a hunter who has been out-hunted and knows it, Mrs. Ashgrove, he said. And he walked out of the Whitmore ball and out of Harrow Bay and out of their lives entirely. Cora let herself breathe. One breath. Just one. Then she smoothed her gown and turned back to the room, the picture of calm, and no one there but Corvin would ever know that the whole future had just balanced on the edge of a knife, and that she had been the one to tip it back, but the night was not finished, because Nathaniel Doran had seen it too. He had watched his hunter, his weapon, his masterstroke, the thing he'd gone into deeper debt to bring from Boston, bow to a woman in green silk and walk out the door, and he did not understand it, and a man who does not understand why he is losing does the most dangerous thing of all. He panics. Doran crossed the room toward them, fast, his face dark and blotched, his composure cracking like ice on a spring pond. Cora saw him coming. She stepped forward to meet him, and Corvin stepped into place at her shoulder with that silent, effortless grace, and the two of them faced Nathaniel Doran together. Side by side. The way they now faced everything, Mr. Doran, Cora said sweetly. Loud enough for the nearest circle to hear. Not loud enough to be a scene. Not yet. How lovely. I've been meaning to ask, how is your Western shipping venture progressing? I do hope your creditors are being patient. I hear they're preparing to seize the last of your ships. Doran's mouth worked. You and a failed registry filing, Cora went on. Sweet as poison. It does look so terribly poor on a young politician's public record. You really must be more careful with your legal judgment in future. Voters notice these things. You think you've won something, Doran hissed, low and shaking. I know what your husband is. I have a file. You have nothing, Corvin said. It was the first time he had spoken, and he did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His voice dropped into the space between them, cold and old and absolutely certain. And Nathaniel Doran felt whatever nerve remained in him simply drain out through the soles of his shoes. Corvin fixed him with a stare that had frozen braver men than Doran. Across 3 centuries. You have debts you cannot pay, Corvin said. Very quietly. You have creditors who will own you by spring. You have a Boston associate who has already disowned you. And you have a suspicion, Mr. Doran, that you can prove to no one. Because the only man who might have helped you prove it just walked out that door. A pause. Colder than the grave. Look around this room. 300 people. Not one of them believes a word you say. You spent it all. Your credit, your favors. Your name. You have nothing. You are nothing. And if you say one more word against my wife or her father, I will spend a portion of a very large fortune ensuring that whatever remains of your family's name is erased so completely that your own grandmother's headstone is repossessed. Do you understand me? Doran's jaw trembled, with fury and with terror. He opened his mouth, and found he could not speak. Frozen under that ancient, unblinking gaze that carried the plain, unmistakable promise of total ruin, Corvin dismissed him with a small nod, the kind of nod a king gives a servant he is finished with. And Nathaniel Doran turned on his heel and fled the Whitmore ballroom before the dessert course was even served. Across the room, near the fireplace, Preston Hale watched it all, his patron humiliated. His secret leverage evaporated. The woman he had thrown away like an old boot standing at the center of the room in green silk and pearls, radiant, untouchable. The wife of the most powerful man any of them had ever seen. Preston's face went through everything: confusion, disbelief, a dawning, sickening understanding of exactly how badly he had misjudged the value of the thing he'd discarded. Cora felt his eyes on her. She turned, and she met Preston Hale's gaze across the crowded ballroom for the last time. She had waited 2 years for this. She had imagined it 100 ways. She had thought she would feel triumph, or vindication, or the sweet hot rush of the last laugh. She felt none of it, only that quiet pity again, for a small man in a small world who had traded away the one good thing that had ever come near him. Because he could not see it for what it was, she did not smile at Preston. She did not glare. She simply looked at him with the calm, level, faintly kind expression of a woman who has, at long last, completely stopped caring. And Preston Hale looked away first. He looked away. And he reached for his bourbon. And Cora saw Vivian standing a few feet behind him, watching her husband with an expression that said a marriage had just quietly ended in the space of a single glance. Whatever the paperwork might still say, Cora caught Vivian's eye and gave her the smallest nod. "Thank you. And I see you. And you did a brave thing tonight." Vivian nodded back. And in the exchange was the strange, unlikely birth of something neither woman would have believed possible 2 years before. Not friendship. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But peace. An armistice between 2 women who had finally, both of them, seen the men who'd tried to make them enemies for exactly what those men were. It was well after midnight when the carriage carried them back toward Blackwood beneath a hard canopy of cold winter stars. Cora sat across from her husband, and for a long while neither of them spoke. There was no need. The quiet between them had become its own language. She thought about Preston Hale, about the wreckage of the girl she used to be. The one who had wept on a kitchen floor over a man that shallow. And she understood something, sitting in that dark carriage, that she had not fully understood before. Those hardships had not been done to her. They had been the ground she was built on. The cruelty, the exile, the 2 years of being the sensible girl by the window. All of it had been the hard, cold ground that a certain kind of strength grows out of. If Preston had married her, she would have spent her life shrinking to fit a small man's small world. His betrayal had been the cruelest gift anyone ever gave her, because it had set her free to become the woman who could stare down a hunter in a ballroom and win. She had not been rescued by a romantic prince. She had been seen and valued, and treated from the first cold, honest word in the Alderton garden as an absolute equal. "We're thinking," Corvin said quietly, across the dark. "I'm always thinking," Cora said. "You married me for it." "I did." A pause. "You asked me a question once, in this same town, whether the arrangement was enough for me. I told you to ask again when the year had turned." His dark eyes found hers in the starlight. "It has turned, Cora. Ask me again." Cora's heart did the complicated thing it did. And this time she let it show. "Is it enough for you?" she asked softly. "This. Us." Corvin reached across the dark space between them, and he took her hand. His fingers were cold, as they always were, as they always would be, and she had come to love the cold. Because it was his. "No," he said. Cora's breath caught. "It stopped being an arrangement a long time ago," Corvin said. "Somewhere between a corrected liability clause and a dead man's forged signature. I could not name the day, which frightened me, because I have not been frightened in 300 years. All that time. All that wealth, all those empty rooms and all those empty houses. I built things because building was the only thing that still resembled being alive." His cold hand tightened around hers. "And then a woman in a mended blue dress stood at a window and refused to break. And I have wanted every day since only to build a future, instead of another structure. It is not enough, Cora. It was never going to be enough. Because I love you. And a man does not want an arrangement with the thing he loves. He wants a life." The carriage rocked on through the winter dark, and Cora Ashby, who had not cried when Preston betrayed her, who had trained herself out of tears the way you train, A muscle felt her eyes sting. She did not fight it. "I was so afraid to trust it," she said. Her voice not quite steady. "After Preston, I thought if I could be that wrong once, I could be that wrong again, and now? Now I know the difference," Cora said, and she laughed. "Wet and soft and real. You have never once asked me to be less than I am. You have never once flinched from what I can do. You made yourself into furniture in a registry office so I could be the fire. And a man who does that," her voice broke, just slightly, "a man who does that isn't a mistake. He's the one right answer I've ever been given." She reached up, and she touched his pale jaw in the dark, cold under her palm. "I love you too, Corvin," then she said. "God help me, I fell in love with a monster, and he is the most honest thing in my whole life." He kissed her then, in the dark carriage, under the cold stars, and his mouth was cold, and his hands were cold, and none of it mattered at all. Because for the first time in 300 years, Corvin Ashgrove was warm somewhere the cold could not reach. And for the first time in 2 years, Cora Ashby was held by someone who saw the whole of her and did not want to change a single figure. Spring came to Blackwood late that year. It always did, in that shaded house among the old elms. But it came. The first green touched the brick walls of the estate. The first warmth softened the iron gates. The fields in Harrow Bay were secure, the deed clean, the mortgage cleared. The tenant families protected under the 3 additions Cora had insisted on in her very first letter. Her father's health had stabilized under the care of the reliable doctors his son-in-law's fortune could summon. The cough had eased. The color had come back to his face. He walked his fields again in the mornings, slow but upright. A man who had thought he'd lose everything and had instead gained a daughter's future and his own next spring. Nathaniel Doran had left Rhode Island entirely. His creditors had taken the ships, then the house, then the name. He surfaced somewhere out west, they said, chasing another scheme. Cora did not think about him at all. He had become, in the end, exactly what Corvin had named him. Nothing, Silas Wren, had been dismissed. His fraud quietly documented and filed away where it could never hurt anyone Cora loved. She had not destroyed him. She had simply taken his teeth. Doran's leverage over Wren had died with Doran's power, and a defanged traitor was no threat to anyone. And Vivian Marsh had left Preston Hale that winter, quietly. With a settlement Cora had, through channels no one could quite trace, helped make more generous than Preston wanted to give. The 2 women were not friends, but twice a year now a letter passed between them. Careful, warm. The correspondence of 2 people who had survived the same fire from opposite sides and come at last to understand who had lit it. Cora stood at the tall library window on a bright spring morning. She watched the light filter through the old glass and fall across the room, and it caught the silver strands of Corvin's white hair as he worked quietly at his desk. He would never walk in the full sun. That was simply true. The way his cold hands were true. But he no longer fled the light entirely. He sat in it now, in the soft-filtered morning of the library, and worked beside her, and let the day touch him at its edges. She thought about how they had built this. Not on the fleeting emotions of a proper courtship, not on the grand promises men break the moment the circumstances change. Preston had made her grand promises. They had burned in 30 seconds in her mother's fireplace. She and Corvin had started with a plain, honest contract, signed on a summer afternoon by 2 people who expected nothing from each other but sound terms. And from those cold lines of ink, they had grown something no contract could have named. A partnership that needed no witnesses because it did not care what anyone else believed. She understood now what she had not understood as the weeping girl on the kitchen floor. That the true value of a life spent together did not lie in dramatic declarations. It lay in the quiet, everyday choice. To face reality side by side. Without flinching, Corvin looked up from his papers, and he met her gaze across the sunlit room with that familiar, complete, undivided attention. The same attention he had given her from the very first moment. Across a crowded parlor full of people who had decided she was nothing, she smiled at him, and she crossed the room to join him at the table. The way she had 1,000 mornings now, and meant to 1,000 more. For however many mornings the strange arithmetic of a mortal woman and an ageless man would allow them. She did not know how many that would be. Neither did he. The future stretched out before them, long and uncertain as the changing seasons, but she knew with an absolute certainty that no gossip and no hunter and no small, cruel man could ever touch again, that whatever came next, they would face it exactly as they always had. together, honestly, one step at a time.